In the American colonies, the public house was the heartbeat of everyday life. Whether you called it a tavern, a coffee house, an inn, or a boarding house, these places were the crossroads of society. Part marketplace, part meeting hall, part stage for both business and pleasure, and just $1 could carry you a long way within those walls. Now here's the catch. In the 1770s, there wasn't an American dollar yet. The United States didn't even exist as a nation. What most colonists used was the Spanish piece of 8, a heavy silver coin that became the de facto currency across the Americas. Colonists also dealt in British pounds and shillings or in local paper notes that few people trusted, but the Spanish dollar was the coin everyone recognized. So when we talk about a dollar in a colonial tavern, we're really talking about that piece of 8. A coin worth roughly $30 to $40 in today's money, enough to cover food, drink, and maybe a seat near the conversations that helped shape a new nation. But here's what made that colonial coin different from the dollars you've seen in the Wild West. On the frontier a century later, cash was common. Clinking coins on the bar for whiskey or cards happened every day. In the colonies, coins were scarce. America wasn't yet a nation with its own standardized currency, and most tavern business ran on credit, debts scribbled into a ledger, settled when the harvest came in or the ship returned to port. That made a single silver coin rarer, heavier, and more powerful than just its metal. Now, you might expect rum or grog to be the drink of choice at a colonial tavern, and yes, there was plenty of that. But remember the Boston Tea Party? There's a reason it wasn't called the Boston Ale Party. Colonists loved their tea, and coffee for that matter. Caffeine was one of the most integral habits of the New World. It fueled the long hours and restless energy of a society where every man had opportunity and made his own luck. Coffee and tea gave colonists the energy to work harder, to talk longer, and to dream bigger. And in the 1760s and 70s, when a new nation was being organized in real time, caffeine became part of the revolutionary bloodstream. There was also a practical reason coffee and tea flowed so freely in the colonies. The Atlantic world was a spiderweb of trade, and the colonies were closer to the sources. Ships coming from the Caribbean, from South America, from the East Indies and Africa reached Boston, New York, and Charleston far faster and with fewer middlemen than in Europe. That meant colonial merchants had quicker, cheaper access to sugar, coffee, and tea. In London, coffee was an expensive luxury. In Boston, it was well on its way to becoming a daily habit. And drinks like these weren't just about taste or energy, they were about survival. Colonists often preferred ale, wine, and brandy to water, because untreated water carried disease. Even without realizing it, boiling water for tea or coffee made it safer to drink by killing bacteria. A steaming cup didn't just sharpen the senses, it made drinking water safer, sometimes without people realizing why. And just because you ordered a coffee at the London Coffee House in Philadelphia or the Merchant's Coffee House in New York didn't mean you weren't also getting a splash of brandy in the cup. Public houses blurred lines. You could take your caffeine neat or fortify it with something stronger depending on your mood. Rum and cider freely flowed from high society down to the masses. But tea and coffee kept everyone energized for work and conversation, keeping the colonies productive, ambitious, and possibly the most well-informed society in the world at the time. For just a few pence, about the cost of a mug of tea or coffee, a colonist bought an evening's worth of caffeine. With a full silver dollar, you could enjoy dozens of cups, enough to fuel days of conversation and work. Coffee house by day, tavern by night. In colonial America, the line between the two was thin. The same building that served coffee to merchants in the morning might roar with rum-fueled songs by evening. Public houses weren't single-purpose. They shifted with the hour and with the crowd that walked through the door. By night, the tavern was the everyman's stage. Farmers fresh from their fields, sailors just off the docks, apprentices with a few coins in their pocket, and weary soldiers all packed into the smoky common room. The air was thick with pipe smoke, sweat, and the sharp tang of cider. Cider was the true daily drink of the colonies. Cheap, plentiful, and brewed in almost every town, it was poured from breakfast through supper. A penny or two bought a mug, which meant $1 could give you your fill of cider for days, 20 or 30 mugs in all. Rum, however, was the tavern's lifeblood. Distilled from Caribbean molasses shipped by New England merchants, rum was strong, cheap, and everywhere. A stiff pour might cost 4 or 5 cents. With a single dollar, you could buy 20 servings, enough to fuel a long night of drinking for yourself or treat your entire table. And drinking wasn't the only way to spend that dollar. Dice rattled on the tabletops, cards slapped against wood, and billiard balls clicked in the corner. A single coin could vanish in seconds, lost to a roll of the dice, or stretch further if luck was on your side. Respectable women rarely drank in taverns or coffee houses. These were noisy, male-dominated spaces, but women weren't absent. Many taverns were run by widows or wives who kept the books, poured drinks, and kept order as best they could. And then there were the women who offered something different. Public women, as they were often called, weren't usually inside the tap room with the men, but they were close by. In boarding houses, upstairs rooms, or just outside on the street. Sometimes a tavern keeper quietly made introductions. Sometimes the arrangement happened in the open. It was never printed on the signboard out front, but everyone knew where to look. A single dollar could buy more than a hot meal and a mug of cider. In the right tavern or the right boarding house, it could also buy the company of a woman, a discreet arrangement understood by both sides, even if frowned upon by polite society. So when the sun went down, the Colonial Tavern came alive. A dollar here might buy you round after round of cider, 20 glasses of rum, a seat at the gaming table, or even a night of companionship. If taverns were where you drank and gambled, inns and boarding houses were where you slept, or at least where you tried to. Colonial travel was rough and accommodations matched. Privacy was a luxury, not a right. A single room might hold 2, 3, or even 4 beds, each one shared by strangers. It wasn't unusual for a weary traveler to climb into bed next to someone he'd never met. Boots on the floor, pistols under the pillow, and snores filling the air. Not everyone could even afford that much. In smaller taverns, a man short on coin might settle for the floor near the hearth. For just a few pennies, he got warmth, a roof, and not much else. Some establishments even kept lofts or dormitory-style bunk rooms where a dozen men slept side by side on straw mattresses. In places like these, a single dollar stretched surprisingly far. It might cover nights of lodging for more than a week. Though comfort was never part of the bargain, meals were often bundled with lodging, bread, cheese, a slice of roasted meat, and a mug of cider. For a few cents, you could eat your fill. For $1, a traveler could cover multiple days of food and lodging together, a rare bargain in a world where travel was slow and exhausting. And then there were the women who worked in the world's oldest profession. They weren't part of the official tavern service, but they were often nearby, in upstairs rooms, boarding houses, or houses tucked into the side streets of a port town. Many came from hardship. Widows sometimes turned to it when left without inheritance or support, since property and wealth usually passed to male relatives. Wives abandoned by husbands who had gone to sea and never returned might find themselves with no other way to feed their children. Divorced women, rare and stigmatized, were often cut off from respectable work. Even some poor wives used it to make ends meet when spinning, washing, or sewing couldn't cover the bills. In a society where most avenues for women's independence were closed, selling companionship became a last, desperate resort. Society knew who they were, and the consequences were harsh. These women were labeled disorderly, fined, or pushed to the edge of respectability. Still, they were part of the ecosystem of public houses. $1 might buy you a bed, a meal, and for some men, a night of company with one of these women. It was never written on the sign out front, but it was understood all the same. That was the strange thing about inns and boarding houses in colonial America. They weren't just places to sleep, they were crossroads, where merchants, sailors, soldiers, and women of every station intersected. Your dollar didn't just buy shelter. It placed you right in the churn of colonial society, its hunger, its desperation, and its possibilities, all under the same roof. If the tavern was noisy, chances are the loudest corner was the gaming table. Gambling was everywhere in colonial America. Dice rattled across wooden planks, cards slapped down in quick succession, billiard balls clicked, and men cheered or cursed their luck. A few pennies bought a seat in the game. $1 could keep you playing for the night, or disappear in a single unlucky hand. Gambling was entertainment, but it was also a temptation that left many men in debt. Tavern keepers tolerated it because it kept customers buying cider, rum, and meals. A dollar sliding across the table almost always meant more coins flowing across the bar. But not all gambling was frowned upon. Lotteries were so common they were practically an institution. Colonies, towns, and even churches relied on them to raise money. They built roads, bridges, harbors, and meeting houses. They even helped fund colleges like Harvard, Princeton, and Yale. Buying a lottery ticket was both a gamble and a civic act. For just a fraction of a dollar, a man could dream of riches while telling himself he was building the future of his community. And with a full silver dollar, he could buy several tickets, each one a chance at fortune. So a colonial dollar could straddle both worlds, the smoky corner where dice decided your fate, and the respectable lottery where luck might just build the foundations of a new nation. For all the games and drink, taverns and coffee houses were also political battlegrounds. In colonial America, politics didn't happen only in courthouses or official halls. It thrived in back rooms thick with pipe smoke fueled by mugs of cider and bowls of rum punch. Boston's Green Dragon Tavern was called the headquarters of the Revolution. Here, men like Paul Revere and Samuel Adams organized protests and planned resistance. In Virginia, the Raleigh Tavern in Williamsburg gave patriots a place to gather when the royal governor dissolved their assembly. In Philadelphia, the London Coffee House buzzed with debates over trade boycotts and pamphlets hot off the press. And these weren't quiet, refined meetings. They unfolded in the same spaces where dice clattered, fiddlers played, and travelers swapped gossip. A colonist might pay $1 for a meal and overhear talk of taxes, trade embargoes, or independence itself. Public houses became, in effect, the printing press of public opinion. News, rumor, and revolutionary ideas spread faster here than through any official channel. The ale loosened tongues, but it was the caffeine of coffee and tea that kept conversations running deep into the night. So when you laid $1 on the counter in 1775, you weren't just buying a drink. You were buying a seat in the very room where rebellion was taking shape. Not every night in a colonial public house was spent plotting rebellion or rolling dice. Sometimes a tavern or coffee house was simply about passing the time with music and company. A fiddler might strike up a lively tune, men stamping their boots in rhythm, voices rising in rough harmony. Ballad singers, jugglers, and traveling performers drifted from town to town, trading their talents for food, drink, or coin. For a penny or two, a colonist could buy a seat near the fire and enjoy a performance. For $1, he could keep the fiddler playing all night, entertaining everyone in the room. Other amusements leaned toward spectacle. Cockfights were common in rural taverns, with wagers placed and feathers flying. Larger establishments might offer billiards, while outdoor gatherings could feature wrestling matches or contests of strength. Admission to a cockfight or a round of billiards might cost a few pennies. For $1, you could place bets all night or pay for round after round of games. Even when no performer or fight was on the bill, the tavern was its own theater. The crowd itself, the arguments, the gossip, the laughter, the songs echoing late into the night, provided endless entertainment. A man might spend $1 on ale and walk away with stories worth retelling for years. In the colonies, leisure was rare, work was demanding, travel was difficult, and free time was precious. Public houses gave people a chance to recharge, not just with food and drink, but with music, games, and human connection. A single coin could turn a long day of toil into a night of memory. So what could $1 buy you in a colonial tavern, or a coffee house, or a boarding inn? It might buy you mugs of cider and rum, or steaming cups of tea and coffee that fueled both ambition and revolution. It could buy you meals of bread, cheese, and stew, or a bed for the night, whether shared with strangers in a crowded loft or claimed by the hearth on the floor. It might vanish in a game of dice, turn into a handful of lottery tickets, or pay for a fiddler to keep the whole room dancing. And for some men, it even bought the company of a woman who, in turn, found in the exchange a way to meet her own daily needs. A mutual arrangement of comfort and survival understood by both sides, even if frowned upon by polite society. That same silver coin, a Spanish piece of 8, carried the weight of 30 to 40 modern dollars. But in the colonies, where hard cash was scarce and trust ran on ledgers, its meaning was heavier than its metal. A single dollar wasn't just an exchange of money, it was a choice, a gamble, a moment of survival or pleasure. Sometimes it was a seat at the very table where the revolution itself was being shaped. That's the strange magic of the colonial dollar. It didn't just buy goods, it bought stories, decisions, and moments that, piece by piece, helped shape the birth of a nation.
Gold and guns, gold and guns. Thank you for watching Golden Guns. Please like and subscribe.